I'd like to call the meeting to order of the March 10 Board of Supervisors meeting. Good morning. Supervisor Garamendi will not be joining us today. Madam Clerk.
Item 1 on the closed session agenda, conference with labor negotiator pursuant to Government Code Section 54957.6, County Designated Labor Negotiator Judy Hawkins regarding employee organization, Calaveras County Sheriff's Management Unit.
Oh, that's right.
Is there any public comment?
Are there any, there's no public. Could you go to the next?
Okay, I'll move on to the next one. So item 2, conference with labor negotiator pursuant to Government Code Section 54957.6 with County Designated Labor Negotiator Judy Hawkins regarding employee organization, Calaveras County Public Safety Employees Association.
Seeing no public, could you please continue?
Item 3, conference with labor negotiator pursuant to Government Code Section 54957.6 with County Designated Labor Negotiator Judy Hawkins regarding employee organization, Calaveras County Deputy Sheriff's Association.
Seeing no public comment, we'll move to the next item.
Item 4, pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D1, conference with legal counsel regarding existing litigation, California Occupational Safety and Health Appeals Board, Calaveras County Public Works, case number 1386290.
Seeing no public comment, the board will adjourn to closed session. We'll reconvene at 9 o'clock. I'm going to reconvene the Board of Supervisors meeting. Madam Clerk, could you please? Oh, I need to do the pledge first. Okay, we're going to do the pledge first, so if you can stand, please do. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Madam Clerk, could you please read out from the closed session?
Report of today's closed sessions. Item 1, conference with labor negotiator pursuant to Government Code Section 54957.6, County Designated Labor Negotiator Judy Hawkins regarding employee organization, Calaveras County Sheriff's Management Unit. There was no reportable action taken. Item 2, conference with labor negotiator pursuant to Government Code Section 54957.6, the County Designated Labor Negotiator Judy Hawkins regarding employee organization, Calaveras County Public Safety Employees Association. There was no reportable action taken. Item 3, conference with labor negotiator pursuant to Government Code Section 54957.6 with County Designated Labor Negotiator Judy Hawkins regarding employee organization, Calaveras County Deputy Sheriff's Association. There was no reportable action taken. And item 4, pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D1, conference with legal counsel regarding existing litigation, California Occupational Safety and Health Appeals Board, Calaveras County Public Works, case number 1386290. There was no reportable action taken.
Thank you. You'll notice Supervisor Garamendi will not be with us today. Are there any staff announcements? Okay. Oh, okay.
Good morning, Chair, Honorable Board. Kathy Galino from Economic and Community Development. Good news, our tablets are here for Census 2020. I just took possession of them yesterday, and I'll be working with folks on doing trainings for volunteers at the various library locations. Please check the Census website. It's under Calaveras County Gov website. And Census is going to be kicking off at the end of this week, believe it or not. They're going to start sending U.S. Census. We'll be sending out postcards to all of our residents, reminding them that the census will be beginning April 1st through April 30th. And they actually will start taking online filings of the questionnaire at the census starting next Monday. This is the plan. I have not seen it yet, has not gone live, the website. And again, census is going to be primarily an online reporting tool. The second choice would be a telephone interview, and then the third choice will be paper. They're trying to stay away from paper. So online, telephone. There's 57 languages available. So we'll be kicking off census. Here we go.
Thank you. I'd like to move to the next item.
Recognition and acknowledgements. Item 5 is from the Economic and Community Development Department to approve a proclamation designating March 2020 as Arts Education Month in Calaveras County.
Good morning, Chair and Honorable Board. Kathy Galino again, Economic and Community Development. Today I bring before you a proclamation to declare March as Art and Education Month. As you can see, there's some beautiful pieces here from our students around the county. And to talk more about it, I'd like to bring up Kathy Mazzaferro, who is the Arts Council Executive Director.
Thank you. Good morning, Board. Thank you. Kathy Mazzaferro, Executive Director, Calaveras County Arts Council. It comes as no surprise, I'm sure, to all of you, the immense amount of talent that we have in this county, especially with our young people. And I have brought you just a small sampling of the art show that's currently in the gallery. You each have an invitation on your desk to stop by the Arts Gallery here on Main Street in San Andreas anytime this month. We have 100 pieces of artwork from Bret Harte, from Calaveras, from Gold Strike, from the Education Center, and from Toy On. And they will be on display, as they are every year, during March to celebrate art spirit. We just wanted to come forward and thank you for this resolution, because the arts for our kids, it does many things, including keep them in school. There are lots of people who will tell you, because they had jazz band, first period, every year in high school, I think I'll stay. And so they did, and they might have gotten through with just the skin of their teeth, but they stayed in high school because of band or drama or art. We're proud of the scholarships that we give, and we're very grateful for the resolution recognizing March as Arts and Education Month in Calaveras County.
Don't go away, Kathy. Just
Okay.
hold your horses. Don't go away. No, I got to give it to somebody.
Well,
and
absolutely.
I'm giving it to you.
It sounds like a plan.
And Kathy, I have to say, really epitomizes arts and education for the kids. So come on up.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, good.
Oh, yeah,
Adding
this one,
to it.
here, very briefly. This one is from Calaveras. This one is from Bret Harte. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank Devin York and Mark Whalety, the art teachers at both high schools, because they come in and hang it all, along with teaching the kids do this. So,
Well,
Marita
these
brought in
three are
these,
from
right?
Avery Middle School. And then I'll do more after I finish chatting with Kathy. Okay. Whereas March is officially recognized as California Arts Education Month by the California Department of Education, and whereas the state of California defines art education to include the courses of study in interdisciplinary learning in dance, music, theater, design, visual, written, and media arts, and the arts are an essential part of a complete education, no matter if it happens in the home, school, or community. These experiences encourage creative learning in children and young adults. And whereas a well-rounded education should include the stimulation and creative thinking that the arts help to develop, and whereas it's important that we recognize and celebrate the essential role of arts education in our schools when it's funded. That was an editorial. And whereas students of all ages benefit from artistic learning, innovative thinking, and creativity. And may I have a motion from the board? No?
Public comment.
Oh, yeah, I forgot. I always forget that. Not that I don't want to hear from you, but does anyone have a story they'd like to share about arts and education? Or give a donation?
Can I interject? This, in 2 weekends, we have Ride and Walk for Art. It's our annual fundraiser to raise money to help support arts and education in our schools. There are 3 different bike rides. The longest one is far too long for me. It's 45 miles. It goes from, that's right, yeah, and it goes from Hogan all the way out around Comanche and Pardee. Like I said, it's far too ambitious for me. I'm perfectly happy to do the 4-mile walk on Hogan, but we'll have a barbecue as well. And all of the money raised at Ride and Walk for Art is specifically designated for our arts education programs to support arts in our schools.
And Kathy's favorite, wait a minute, his expression is, and we get no government funding.
Yeah.
So based on that, may I have a motion, please?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Supervisor.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Supervisor Miller. I have a motion, I have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Passes on a 401 absent vote. Therefore, be proclaimed that the Calaveras County Board of Supervisors recognizes March as Arts Education Month in Calaveras County as a way to further strengthen the importance of arts and share the message with family, friends, and community. Passed and adopted by the board today, the 10th day of March. Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you, Marita. Thank
Okay.
you very much.
You want to put that
Oh, gosh, Marita, don't do that.
Oh.
Okay, much better. Thank you all very
Okay.
much.
So I have to do a little more artsy sharing. This also is from Avery Middle School. This one is break dance, dancer, also from Avery Middle School.
That's out of tinfoil, isn't
And
it?
this is out of tinfoil. And these are done by kids from Hazel Fisher that are going on the mural that is being developed for the Arnold Library. So the arts are alive and well when the kids are involved. So we had to do show and tell. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, move to consent agenda.
No. Public comment.
Oh, you know, I don't know why I don't want to listen to the public. And you know, I have a sign here that reminds me. I'll put it right here.
General public comment. Any item of interest to the public that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board and is not posted on the consent or regular agendas may be addressed during the public comment period. California law prohibits the board from taking action on any matter which is not posted on the agenda unless it is determined to be an emergency by the Board of Supervisors. If public comment is completed before the 30-minute allotted time period, the board may immediately move to the next order of business. If public comment is not completed during the allotted time period, it will be continued as the last item of business in order to provide an opportunity for the remainder of comments to be heard.
Okay. Well, did you?
Greetings, Madam Chair and Honorable Board. I'm Will Moore, Valley Springs. I'd like to make a few comments about socialism. Government is the means by which we, the people, combine our powers and resources to provide public services and public works that otherwise private sector wouldn't or couldn't provide. That's socialism. I worked as a clerk on the Tuesday election, poll clerk. If you're a poll clerk, you're the last person to find out what happened in the election. So in this day after headline, I see that Bernie Sanders, a self-declared Democratic Socialist, won the primary here in California. Socialism is a dirty word in the American lexicon. 3 generations of Americans have never heard a good word about socialism. It's all been anti-socialist propaganda, all bad. Considering that Bernie Sanders has what is arguably the 2 most powerful political parties on planet Earth arrayed against him, his chances of being president are pretty slim. Nevertheless, whether he ever gets to be president or not, he has at least opened up the subject to some rational discussion, not clouded by Cold War hysteria. That's a good thing. My parents came up out of the Depression on a WPA paycheck. That was socialism. They were staunch Roosevelt New Deal Democrats. I'm living on Social Security, Medicare, and a union pension. If it had been up to the anti-socialists of the Roosevelt period, I would never have had Social Security, Medicare, or a union, or a pension. If it wasn't for socialism, I would in fact right now be dead. Not only would I be dead, I would have been living in poverty and misery when I died. In addition to that, a bunch of anti-socialists living in Calaveras County would also be dead right now. Here we are, 80 years after the New Deal. The anti-socialists of the new millennium in the Congress and the White House are trying to terminate Social Security, Medicare, and all forms of social welfare. They're trying to take away my lifeline to fund the war machine, tax breaks for the wealthy, corporate welfare, and endless wars. It's just what we need is more war. Knock off all of this social welfare stuff. Thank you.
Thank you.
I was just getting started.
I'm sure. Any other public comments? They come as a team, Al. Just get up here.
I hope that I'm not going ahead because of my age. I was going to talk about Prop 13, but the marvelous topic of socialism came up, so I was going to say something about that one. Probably the best comment that I heard about socialism was by Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher said, "Socialism is great until you run out of other people's money." When you think about it a little bit, and you think of the history of socialism, every place it's been tried, you can see nothing has been more true than those comments, and more that captivates the meaning of socialism. Now, Prop 13, the new Prop 13 was overturned by the taxpayers, by the voters. And this is kind of interesting. Why did they pick Prop 13 for such a huge bond issue? The effort to overcome the new Prop 13 was by Harvard's Taxpayer Association, Ron Coppell, who spent $250 million. This is up against $20 million by Newsom and the advocates for that Prop 13. And the lesson that we can learn from this, I think, is we need to watch the news media a little closer. And that doesn't mean censoring the news media. It means contacting the editors every time they publish something that's true and unbiased. We need to have information to make decisions, not have our minds made up by the media for us. It's a different type of journalism. It's called honesty. We can promote that. We can promote that in a positive way by every time they do something right, tell them so, you appreciate it. And I don't think if this was done in a grassroots way, it wouldn't be long before we had most of our problems solved, just by truth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Segal.
Hello, Pamela Richmond, D2. This is a summation of both tax problems and excuses negatively impacting D2 and other areas in Calaveras caused by Leslie Davis, the tax assessor. A computer glitch, never explained technically in detail, software problems identified as hiccups, blind spots, followed by lack of quality control implicating untrained staff. Reduction error by 10%, a factor base year value of all parcels in the burn area of 2018, blamed on staff and glitch. Significant numerous errors in taxes, including use code errors. In one case, land value transposed for structure value, resulting in DIV miscalculations. Continued errant DIV status on properties in burn area beyond 2012 when market was increasing, creating financial hardship. 7,900 transfer backlog in a county of 45,000. Our neighboring county, Amador, does not have a backlog. Incorrect, irregular, and overassessment of rebuilds, leading to incorrect and higher taxes, or conversely, missing assessments leading to future escaped ones. Multiple supplemental bills, 3 to 6 on a sale, often in the thousands, paid in a 60-day to 6-month time frame. Multiple escaped assessments are to come after supplementals. We have been receiving them out of order. 10% calamity reduction on burned properties post-Butte Fire 2015. Other counties use 25%. See 170 of the Revenue and Tax Code. After consulting with insurance companies, Davis decided a 10% reduction in value for properties destroyed by the fire would be justifiable. Calaveras Enterprise, November 26, 2019. Note, insurance companies would generally be consulted for structures, improvements, and payouts, not assessing land value. Threatening and punitive, uncooperative, non-transparent, telling a property owner they'd have to, quote, sell one of their properties to pay for their property taxes. Writing to someone on Facebook about their property, person subsequently wrote they felt threatened and thought they had attacked, quote, a hornet's nest. Had a chilling effect when she named us, saying she had, quote, reviewed our files in detail and as a result of that, noticed a consistent error that affects all properties damaged by the Butte Fire. Adding those properties would see an increase of 5 to 10% in land value for 2020. High staff turnover and, quote, inadequate training of new staff. After the devastating Butte Fire, tax irregularities have caused undue hardship. Leslie Davis has not done her fiduciary duty to the citizens of Calaveras County who have suffered tremendous losses after the Butte Fire and now face losing their homes again. Thank you.
Good morning, Cynthia Sanchez, D2. The Butte Fire survivors have been victimized continuously for 4.5 years. This fire opened up a nefarious portal. Number 1, the debris removal program was pure extortion. Number 2, the tree removal program was the same. Number 3, 8.06 ordinance was an attempt to tax all structures 10 by 12 or smaller. Who is behind that? Ed Short, who is no longer with the county. Ethan Turner, who will be leaving at the end of this month. And who would be assessing all those small structures on the properties? The assessor. Number 4, shipping containers was another attempt to tax the property owners. Again, Ed Short, Ethan Turner, and who would be assessing those shipping containers? The assessor. Number 5, the huge increase in property taxes, primarily in the burn area. This graph shows the factor base year value and the real estate market. Once a base year value is established, it is subject to an annual increase that cannot exceed 2% or the increase in the California CPI, whichever is less. When the real estate market declines, the assessor is required to temporarily lower the assessed value of the property. Once the value is lowered, the assessor will review the market value every year and adjust the assessed value accordingly. Once the market value exceeds the factor base year value, the property will be assessed at its factor base year value. In 2012, when the real estate market was improving, down here, and properties were increasing in value incrementally every year in the rest of the county, the properties in the Mountain Ranch area and the Moke Hill area were thrown into a deep decline in value status. This green line here. They were thrown into the abyss. This continued for 5 years. Strange how this deep decline in value status kind of has the same footprint as the burn area, which happened 3 years later. The assessor stated on December 12, 2019, she noticed consistent errors that affected all properties damaged by the Butte fire. Staff reduced the factor base year value of all 2018 parcels that were affected by the fire. Coincidence? Of the 63 parcels submitted to BOE, 43 of them were thrown into the abyss, and since that time, numerous more. Now the burn area property owners are receiving numerous supplemental and escape assessment tax bills. Thank you very much for your time.
Good morning, Terry McBride, District 2. Nicely, though, the rest of the county is now paying the price for the assessor's office inability to do their job. So I have a question. When you're an elected official, what consequence or repercussion do you pay when you don't do your job or you do it incorrectly, especially as one that is as important as the county assessor who has a mandatory fiscal responsibility? I'll tell you who pays: the county and the state, because you haven't been receiving the tax income over a period of time that would have been spread out for us property owners, so we wouldn't even be here. And you're not able to provide the services to your constituents and your citizens because you haven't been receiving the taxes on a regular basis. The citizens and taxpayers of this county have horribly paid the price by having to give up long sought after, maybe a vacation after working long, hard days, maybe some improvement on their home. How about sleep at night? I cannot tell you how many people have tears in their eyes as they're talking to me, Cynthia or Pam, about how in the hell are they going to pay this tax? Because it's coming out of nowhere. I actually had somebody that I would consider in a bit of power say that it's our responsibility to contact the assessor's office and ask them where the supplementals and that sort of thing are. No, it isn't. That's her job. She needs to do it. I don't need to call her and say, when are you going to do your job? Do your job. It's not being done. So the repercussions are definitely being felt by us, the citizens that voted for some of you. And she is not meeting her responsibility in any way in capacity of her job. So on top of which, once we get the bill, it's a tax. It's not a bill. It's a tax. So we have to pay it. Then we have to hire an assessor an appraiser. We have to file the forms to appeal it. Then we have to hire an appraiser to come and back us up. All money out of our pocket. And then we have to appear in front of a hearing board. Again, what are the repercussions to her? And so I am asking once more, at one point in time, does this Board of Supervisors do a closed-door meeting? See what in the heck is going on. Stand up for your citizens, for your constituents, for your property tax builders or payers. At what time are you going to do a no confidence vote? Or do we, as the citizens, have to go legal action because we're ready? We have hundreds of people that have been contacted. I can't believe you haven't heard a word. I cannot believe it. We're ready for legal action. Do your job, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry.
Good morning, Vicki Reinke. I'm not prepared to speak this morning, but you know me, I can't just let something go by that is, I feel, very false and not accurate information, and that is on socialism. Yes, it is a big discussion in America now, and I think that's a good thing. I hope people educate themselves as to what true socialism is and the way that's being chipped away in our society and reject it. True socialism is the taking over of government, that government knows best, taking private property away from people and equalizing people. It doesn't work. If you look at history, and you'll see, there's a book that I think is a pretty good book to read. It was written in the 50s when communism and socialism was big in discussion, and it's called The Naked Communist. It was written by a professor, and it's well done. So it explains what socialism is, and Marx and Lenin and Stalin, all the people, and what their beliefs were. And it's utopian. It doesn't work. America was founded on freedom, on property rights, we're the only country in the whole world, and we cannot change that. And so I hope people will educate themselves. And when people say, oh, we're a socialist country already because we have Social Security, we paid into that, people. It came out of our paychecks when we worked. So that wasn't quite that. And I just have to go back because my Nani used to teach me things about the government. And one of the things she taught me was don't ever take anything from the government. That was pride those days. It's not here anymore. So socialism is starting to creep in because they knew what was going to happen once the government started giving out all these free programs. So it was very limited as who would ever even take that money. Now it's okay, you can take money from the government and not feel guilty. It's a scary thing. It could ruin our United States of America. And so anyway, I just had to get up, at least say a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Carolyn Burns. I am here today because my house was sold for default taxes. I am a surviving military spouse, and I was under the assumption, well, what I thought was my house was covered for the property taxes via the veterans exemption, which it should have been, but my house was sold for property taxes. And I was not aware until November, and I did not, sorry, I've never done this.
That's fine.
Taxation code 3704.7, there was no real contact from the collector. Also, when the VA exemption went through, they still continued, they didn't properly redo the tax bill. So they did not do a reassessment of what I owed. I'm not sure.
That's fine.
Just relax.
But this is my home.
Yes,
Yeah.
I understand.
So I am requesting a recession of the sale based on the taxation code and the fact that it was not properly reevaluated after the VA exemption went through.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Burns, we will have someone get hold of you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Well, could you please give your name and number to the clerk? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I got it. Any other public comment? All right, move to consent agenda.
Consent agenda items are expected to be routine and non-controversial. They'll be acted upon by the board at one time without discussion. Any board member, staff member, or interested party may request removal of an item from the consent agenda for later discussion.
Does any member of the board wish to pull an item? Any member of staff? Any member of the public? Right. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Supervisor
Second.
Mills, second by Supervisor Toffenelli. All in favor?
Aye.
Passes on a 401 absent vote. Thank you. We're going to move to the regular agenda, item 18, approving the administrative policy regarding the...
This is item 17. We have a
No, I'm doing item 18. I'm just
Okay.
telling people. I'm
Understood.
removing item 18, and that will move out to March 24th. Okay. 18. Okay. I'd like to move to item 17.
Could we have a minute for them to set up?
Sure. How about 5 minutes? Thank you.
Al? Oh, you can't do, you have to do another meeting?
Sorry to interrupt yours.
I want to move to the regular agenda item, Madam Clerk.
Item 17 is from Public Health Services to receive an update presentation from staff on COVID-19 novel coronavirus.
My understanding is, Dr. Kalita, you're going to lead this discussion. Okay, thank you. Please proceed.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Dean Kaleda. I'm the local health officer for Calaveras County, and we're here today representing the Public Health Services Division of the Health and Human Services Agency of Calaveras County. There's myself, and there's Chris Edgerly, who's the manager of the Emergency Preparedness Program activities of the County Health Department. We wanted to give the board and the public an update on the novel coronavirus situation that's not primarily focused on national statistics or even California data, but's focused on Calaveras County, where we stand with this and what the potential impacts are to the medical care system and the health of our community and our constituents. So I'll just start with a little bit of background and remind you that this is a rapidly developing situation. Numbers that I might give you now might have been updated since I last looked at them last night, and the situation is rapidly changing. So I just wanted to preface the talk by saying that. What is COVID-19? Now, this is a novel coronavirus. Coronaviruses are a family of viruses that cause health problems in people, respiratory illnesses, common wintertime colds, that kind of thing. So coronaviruses as a family aren't new. What is new is this strain of novel coronavirus that we're hearing about is new, and so there's no immunity in the population to it at all because no one's ever been exposed to it, and it's causing more severe disease than most coronaviruses typically do. The clinical presentation of COVID-19 related novel coronavirus infection is typically mild illness. So 80% of people who get this infection develop relatively minor symptoms: cough, fever, sore throat, respiratory symptoms. They get better on their own without possibly even needing medical attention, and their symptoms resolve. 20% of people, however, may develop more serious disease. 15 to 20% of people, we estimate. More serious disease includes more difficult breathing problems, pneumonia, requiring hospitalization, respiratory collapse, sepsis, and death. So that group of patients can develop, of course, the more serious manifestations of COVID-19 infection, and those tend to be people who are at higher risk. Higher risk individuals are people who are older or people who have underlying health problems, heart disease, diabetes mellitus, other kinds of comorbid health conditions that put them at increased risk. Those are the people that are having more trouble if they are developing COVID-19 infection. The illness is mainly spread or transmitted by droplet contact from one sick person to another well person. So that's how the disease is transmitted, by person-to-person contact, from a sick person to a non-sick person. It can potentially be transmitted through contact with surfaces, doorknobs, toys, that kind of thing. But the virus, we don't think, based on other coronaviruses, lives for prolonged periods in the environment outside of a human host, and routine disinfectants that kill other viruses can sterilize or can decontaminate surfaces in the environment relatively easily. The virus can be spread by touching one's mouth or nose after contact with a sick person as well. So what's the situation in the United States? Imported cases of COVID-19 infection from travelers were first identified in the United States. These were people who had been to areas of the world where COVID-19 infection was more endemic, like China, Iran, Italy, South Korea, these other countries where the virus either originated from in China or spread to other countries. And now we're seeing in the United States domestic person-to-person transmission that's happening in our communities. And that's the more concerning problem that we're seeing now as this outbreak continues to evolve. You can see states there on the map that have reported COVID-19 cases. California and Washington are darker color, right? And on the legend, you can see that's because they have greater than 100 to 200 cases. And so California's in that club. Yes.
Is that, in the California numbers, they took people in at Travis Air Force Base and they're taking cruise ship in yesterday? Are these numbers reflected to that?
Yes,
is that counting those numbers?
Yes, Supervisor Tofinelli, and I'll address that answer with this infographic that's up on the screen right now. So in California, there's been 88 positive cases of COVID-19 infection, and we'd have to update the deaths this morning to 2, as there was another death from a resident of Santa Clara County that was reported last night. And so you can see of those 88 positive cases, Supervisor, 64 of those cases were not related to people who were repatriated to the United States from other countries in quarantine. That was 24 of the 88 cases. So those 64 cases are cases that developed here in the state of California. Of those 64 cases, 31 were travel related, 19 were person-to-person transmission, 10 community transmission. Now, community transmission is a case of COVID-19 infection that develops in a person with no travel history, with no exposure to a known COVID-19 case. This is a silent transmission that occurred in the community, and the concern for that is that there may be other disease transmission that's occurring under our noses in communities that we don't know about because they don't fit the pattern of that travel history from countries that have endemic COVID-19 disease occurring at a high level. There's 10,250 persons who are self-monitoring after having returned to the United States and been screened through San Francisco International Airport and LAX, who are symptomatic, and those people are on self-quarantine. There's 15 labs in the state of California now, all still within the public health system, that have the capacity to do COVID-19 testing now. So not all tests for COVID-19 patients need to go to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention Laboratory in Atlanta, Georgia anymore. We're starting to get that testing capability out to state public health labs, and we have 15 labs in California right now that have the test kits and capabilities to do the testing. It still has to go through the public health laboratory system, however, and I'll talk about that in a minute. 49 counties in California have individuals who are on self-monitoring protocols, including Calaveras County. So what's the situation in Calaveras County? In Calaveras County, we've got no confirmed cases of COVID-19 so far to date of any resident of Calaveras County. I think that's an important point. We do have some individuals who are Calaveras County residents who were on the Grand Princess cruise ship, and they returned to their homes in Calaveras County, and they were on quarantine for 14 days, home monitoring protocol for the development of symptoms of illness for 14 days. The 14 days went away. Those people were taken off of home quarantine, because if you don't get it in 14 days after you've been exposed to it, you're not going to get it, and you're okay. We had a few individuals who developed symptoms during that time, however, and those people were tested for COVID-19 infection and tested negative. So again, we've had no cases in Calaveras County residents. We've had a few individuals who were exposed to a COVID-19 case outside of our community in the capacity of healthcare work. And those individuals have also been tested, and they're on self-monitoring, self-quarantine at home, and the results of those tests are pending. We should have those as early as today or tomorrow.
If I may ask one question, Dr.
Yes.
Kaleda.
Yes, Supervisor.
The tests, I mean, there's been some things going around. Sometimes there may be a false positive. Is there any instances of false negatives where it is actually a positive, or are they pretty standard and overall?
The test is very accurate for COVID-19 infection. If a person does test positive in one of the state laboratories, like I said previously, that there are 15 labs in California now that can perform the COVID-19 testing, any positive results from those individuals will get sent to the CDC lab in Atlanta, Georgia for confirmatory testing, just to be sure. So we'll call a person who tests positive here in California presumptively positive, and then that test will be confirmed just to be absolutely sure. But it's turning out that presumptive positive cases, for all intents and purposes, are real positive cases, and we treat them as such because the test is very accurate. Its level of sensitivity and specificity are both very high.
Good, thank you.
All right, so who gets tested? So there is criteria for people to be tested for COVID-19 infection. The criteria for testing are that a person is sick, they have a fever, they have respiratory symptoms, and they've had a travel history to a part of the world where COVID-19 illness is happening in high amounts. They've had an exposure to a COVID-19 case that we know about, or this is kind of a broadened criteria now for COVID-19 testing. A person who is sick, meaning that they have a fever and respiratory symptoms, they are hospitalized, they have had other testing that doesn't show any other explanation as to why they're sick, then we'll go ahead and recommend testing on those people too. So that's broadened now to some degree. But again, the testing still takes place through the public health laboratory system. So if local medical providers in the community have a patient that they're concerned about, they need to consult with us in public health, and then we'll go ahead and okay the testing. We'll coordinate it with the CDC and the California Department of Public Health laboratories that do the testing. In Calaveras County, we don't have our own public health laboratory. We contract with San Joaquin County for public health laboratory services. So San Joaquin County is our go-to public health laboratory when it comes to COVID-19 testing. And we coordinate obtaining the specimens, transporting the specimens to the San Joaquin Public Health Lab at Stockton. And if they don't have the capacity to do the test, which I don't think as of right now, they're one of the 15 labs, they forward the specimen to the appropriate public health laboratory, either Sacramento County or the State Public Health Laboratory in Richmond, California, to complete the testing. So those are the people that we want to test. If a person is a member of the public and they were to have a sore throat and they were just worried that they might have COVID-19 testing, they went to their doctor, it may be difficult to obtain testing on individuals without meeting that more strict criteria at this point because of the limited testing capabilities that we still have in the public health laboratory system. There's discussion of continuing to ramp up testing and to broaden the testing criteria to include people who just are concerned and might want a test. But right now, we want to limit the testing on individuals that we suspect have a high risk of COVID-19 infection because they meet that current testing criteria. Wanted to touch on what some of the potential impacts to the medical care system are that we could be looking at. So what this slide shows is that what's called case fatality rate of COVID-19 infection, we're estimating anywhere from 1% to 2% so far, right? That doesn't sound very high. You might think, well, shoot, if 99 people out of 100 get COVID-19 infection, only one dies. That doesn't sound too bad. That's a big deal, because if that level of severity continues, then that could really challenge the medical care system to take care of those people, because that's considered a very high case mortality rate, case fatality rate. In 1968, there was an outbreak of influenza, which had a case fatality rate of 0.1%. And throughout the United States, 38 million people needed medical care, 1 million hospitalizations resulted, and 200,000 people in the United States needed ICU care. There's 46,000 ICU beds in the United States. In the 1918 influenza pandemic, 38 million people also needed medical care. 9.6 million hospitalizations resulted, and 2.9 million people required intensive care. In Calaveras County, Mark Twain Medical Center has 25 beds and eight, I'll say, ICU beds. Technically, they're only running at 6 right now, but they're licensed for 8 ICU beds. So depending on the level of severity of disease, the medical care system in our community could be challenged. And that's some of the assumptions that we're operating under as part of our preparedness activities. So I calculated some numbers under a moderate impact or level of severity of the COVID-19 infection. Calaveras County could be looking at a need for 263 hospitalizations and 52 ICU patients. And again, I wanted to lay out for you what our current capacity is, and you can see how that strains and challenges our limited care capacity in our community. And those are some of the assumptions that we need to be operating under. So what are the current local risks? The immediate risk to Calaveras public is considered low at this time because we don't have disease activity occurring in our community. We're still in a containment mode in Calaveras County. Healthcare workers are at increased risk of exposure, and so we're working with the hospitals and the local medical community on what's called personal protective equipment procedures that they wear when caring for sick patients or potential COVID-19 patients. People who have close contacts with, obviously, a COVID-19 patient is at elevated risk. Travelers returning from endemic countries where COVID-19 occurrence is happening at high rates are at increased risk. And the public health department's disseminated guidance to the medical care community, to our local hospital, to medical clinics, about management of people with potential COVID-19 infection. I wanted to take a minute and talk about the issue of what are called community mitigation activities, closure of schools, closure of large mass gatherings in the community, because there's been some concern in the public about whether or not we should move towards doing that. There are guidelines issued by the California Department of Public Health on these issues that are evidence-based and science-based, and they have criteria that they recommend when and how to issue closures of those other mass events or schools. For example, the guidance for school closures gives 4 different scenarios for recommending school closure. Scenario 1 is what we're under now, where there's no disease activity taking place in your community and there's no community transmission of COVID-19 taking place. There's no recommendation to close schools. There's still recommendations for the schools to engage in good practices to prevent disease transmission in the first place. You would use those for routine influenza anyway. That would be hand washing, covering one's mouth or nose when coughing, issuing hand sanitizers, easily in the school setting, having kids stay home when they're sick until they're better, those kinds of activities. And then the second scenario for recommending school closures is if you start to get a local disease with community transmission. So 2 cases of COVID-19 infection in a community would then kind of step up to the next phase of starting to recommend isolated school closures to prevent transmission in the school setting. A third scenario would be that you have an actual case in a student or a teacher or a staff member of a school. Then you start to get more on firm footing when it comes to recommending closure of individual schools. The fourth scenario is if you have cases of multiple kids and potentially multiple schools, then there's recommendations for more widespread closures under those scenarios. So when it comes to school closure, there's good recommendations on when and how to roll something like that out. Let's look at mass gatherings in the public, large meetings, Irish Days at Murphy's, local movie theaters, right? People call the health department and they say, Dr. Kaleda, you need to close the movie theater in Angels Camp because people could get COVID-19. Again, we don't have any cases in the community. We have no evidence of community transmission. And just like with schools, the recommendations for closure of public events or mass gathering is contingent upon the demonstration of local disease occurrence happening in the community, and we're not there. So that's why the public health department and I as health officer have not recommended closure of those other large community events or meetings or mass gatherings in the community yet, because it's based on the absence of demonstrable disease activity in our community. That could change. If disease starts to occur here, those recommendations might be forthcoming. There's still recommendations for people to undertake routine prevention activities that could help keep them well. Events should have hand hygiene capabilities. They should have the ability for hand washing. They should have hand sanitizing stations. People who are sick, they should post signage up and say, if you're sick, don't come to this event, right? People should stay home if they're sick. They should not expose others in a community, especially in a large mass gathering. And there's recommendations now, which are new, for people who are high risk to elect not to travel on an airplane, elect not to take a cruise, right? Choose not to attend a large mass gathering if they are high risk. If a person's elderly or has underlying health problems, they most likely would elect not to attend an event like that out of concern for their own personal health. So those voluntary exclusions of persons who are high risk are also recommended at this time too. So again, there's a general item about what can communities and our community do to prepare. Again, routine guidance that we have talked about for other respiratory pathogens like influenza for a while now. Stay home if you're sick, cover your cough, wash your hands, don't touch your eyes and mouth, avoid close contact with people who are sick, clean kids' toys, doorknobs, use hand sanitizer, pretty liberally, and call the public health department if you are exposed to a COVID-19 patient or you are at high risk because of your travel history and you develop respiratory symptoms including fever, cough, and shortness of breath. And then high-risk persons should make decisions for travel and attending large community events based on their risk factors. So I want to turn it over to Chris to discuss our emergency preparedness response, and then OES has some comments, and we're going to be available for questions.
Hi, good morning. My name is Christopher Edgerly. I'm your Emergency Preparedness and Response Manager for your Public Health Division, Health and Human Services Agency. I'm going to go over some of the emergency preparedness response that we are doing here. Currently working, and we have worked with our local, state, and federal agencies during the monitor and to prepare for anything that we have to do with this COVID disease activity that we have. We are continually sending out press releases to the media as this evolves. We are providing ongoing communication with the City of Angels, our local preparedness and response to the COVID-19. We have developed a social media campaign to educate the public. It's all over our website. We've been pushing out press releases and anything that we can to educate the public as to how this is evolving. We've met with our local hospital representatives, both from Adventist, Sonora, and Mark Twain Medical Center, to ensure that they themselves are prepared and they have enough PPE for their staff. The health officers provided guidance to our medical community on the COVID-19 testing and infection control activities, and we continue to push out that information as well. We meet and have met with our Calaveras Tuolumne Healthcare Coalition. The Healthcare Coalition is not just the hospitals and public health agencies, but it's everybody that provides any type of healthcare or services to healthcare, being Common Ground, any of the transportation agencies, Avalon Healthcare, which is another topic that is getting a lot of steam today on the congregate healthcare for the elderly. We're getting a lot of guidance on that today and how to help work with them. We provide case management for suspected cases. So the suspected cases that we have tested so far here, we're providing case management for, and keeping contact with them and making sure that they continue to isolate and quarantine in their homes. We have tested people according to the CDC's guidelines, and Dr. Kaleda mentioned what those were. We've created a COVID-19 specific page on our website that is continuously updated daily with new guidance documents that we receive from both the CDPH and CDC. We distribute a memo and supporting documents to school districts. That was also done yesterday. We keep getting updated guidance on schools, so we keep pushing that out as we get it. We've sent email communication to all the Calaveras County employees encouraging hand washing, and other preventive actions. We distributed printed resources on stopping the spread of the respiratory illness to all departments of Calaveras County. We've also sent signage to all of the department buildings to be put up, and it's supposed to be public facing, so they know exactly what they should do as far as washing their hands. And if you have any questions, we can probably say that to after OES, unless you would like to ask questions then.
Just a real quick question for those that are in fire districts and first responders. Is there any changes to the EMS protocols, or is everything pretty much standard as is?
Standard as is. We've gotten guidance at the beginning just for EMS, but it's now been expanded to all first responders, including law enforcement.
Okay,
So it's pretty much a standard response on PPE for all of them at this point.
Right, that's what I was asking. Thank you.
Going back to the impacts to the medical care system, you brought up that we can only retain so many people, and if we go into a very severe case that we'll be outside the boundaries of what we can actually serve with the hospital in the severe case, is what I'm assuming by looking at these numbers. Is there any plans going forward for retaining other facilities to expand the services if we get to this type of situation? Are we looking at that with like a Cal OES, or like if the schools are out, will we be able to move into a gym and put more people into a facility as such?
There's comprehensive planning that takes all of the things that you just mentioned into account. The hospital and hospital representatives are here. They're free to speak on this if they have any additional comments about beyond what I'm saying. But I've been working with the hospital and the local medical community since I first became health officer here in October of 2000. September 11th of 2001 was the terrorist attacks and the potential for bioterrorism, anthrax, smallpox, That was kind of the beginning of some of our emergency planning for how to handle a surge of, infectious patients. We saw the H1N1 influenza outbreak in 2009, and we also had to gear up planning for what we call surge planning and surge, capacity for when the need for medical care exceeds what you're normally able to provide. How do you do that? And there are very specific and stepwise plans to ramp up hospital services, medical clinic services to meet that excess demand. Once things get beyond that, the local hospital and medical care community has the ability to expand their services even outside of their normal facilities through setting up tents in the parking lot, through expanding services into non-traditional areas where care isn't normally given to meet that excess demand. And there are even plans to open what's called an alternate care site, which would be a completely freestanding medical care facility in a local high school gymnasium or some other non-traditional care site as well. So even though on that slide I put that there's going to be potentially a need to ramp up medical care services beyond what we're currently ready to provide, we have very specific plans in place of how we would surge the medical care community to meet that excess demand. A lot of that also is contingent upon mutual aid agreements with neighboring jurisdictions, transferring patients to other hospitals, other jurisdictions where they might have care and bed capacity that we could draw upon as well.
Excellent, thank you. That's a question I get quite a bit from the community during these times. Thank you.
Dr. Kalita, you didn't mention too that you do ongoing tabletop exercises. I've sat in on a few of them that help to understand that coordination and how an incident can expand very rapidly, and how you would be able to take advantage even of FEMA or other options that would be available to you. So I just want to be sure that the public understands that you folks don't just wait for something to happen. These are things that you are planning and you're constantly training on.
Thank you, Supervisor Mills. For the community's information, the public health system and the emergency preparedness programs have been planning for events like this for 20 years.
Any questions? Right. Okay.
Here, I'll just slide in. Brief moment of musical chairs. Good morning, Madam Chair and Supervisors. I am John Osborne, your Director of Emergency Services. We have been in support of the public health officer and their operations since we activated on the 27th of February. We upgraded from normal operations to what's called a level 3 activation. That's a duty officer status, where we are monitoring what's happening at the local level and interfacing with our inland region to get a broader operating picture of what's happening around us and statewide. We began holding daily meetings with public health and to ensure that our response is being facilitated properly and that our public health folks have the resources that they need. In the larger scheme of emergency operations, we as OES have the overarching management task of managing and assisting the emergency services or the emergency support functions, which public health is one of them. So as public health, as the demand for greater operations or less operations take place, we mirror that in our response at OES. So we upgraded to a duty officer status, which mirrored public health, and began holding regular formal conversations with public health and our response partners to make sure that we were getting accurate information from public health, and then it was getting out to our field being our first responders, both from the law side and the fire and medical side. In accordance with Public Health's increased activation to level 2, which is a limited emergency operations center, we stood up the emergency operations center on the 5th. We stood it up and opened it and began holding daily briefings with our field response folks and our state level folks. So we act as the link between the local response and the regional response, which serves as a link to the statewide response, which serves as a link to the nationwide response. So the EOC Center really is the link that gives us all a common operating picture from Chris's operation as the section chief, the operations section chief, all the way up to FEMA. We did that, and in fact, we held our daily call this morning at 8:30, and these calls are meting out questions and best practices for our responders, and we're able to gather the information that they need and either get that information from our public health partners, or our public health partners are able to go out and retrieve that information from their sources, provide it back to us. One of the things that we have been doing is a slight difference in what I would term as normal operations. During medical aids, our first responders are limiting their personnel to an ambulance member and a fire member. They are qualifying the situation to make sure that we don't have a potential for an exposure of a potentially infected person, and then they're resuming operations. The idea behind that is, as you are all very aware, we are a very small community. Our fire departments have very limited and strained resources, and if we were to unfortunately expose an entire engine crew or an entire ambulance crew or both to a COVID-19 patient, that could be crippling for both agencies. And to mitigate that, we are using controlled entrance into the situation that they're on, a routine medical aid, and making sure that we're not exposing an entire engine crew at once. We had a medical aid call that had some potential at the time to have some sickness. It turned out that it was just really a language barrier with the patient, and we used those protocols. We deconned those folks in accordance with the CDC guidelines, and eliminated any risk to our first responders in them being quarantined that way. So I expect that we will continue that until we have a better idea about what's happening in the county. Whoops, I'm sorry. So this is our OES contact page. You'll see myself and my contacts, our emergency services coordinator, Cameron, as well as our department analyst, Julie, and of course my shameless plug for if you haven't registered for Calaveras Alert, you should think about it. And we are happy as a group to address any questions that you may have.
John, are you using Calaveras Alert for this? I haven't checked it.
We have not pushed out any messaging via Calaveras Alert at this time. Should things progress in what I would say a negative way, where we have a case or we have a need to dispense critical information in a timely manner, we would certainly use that. We have been partnering with public health in pushing out their information and hopefully spreading that information farther out into our community. I have to give a lot of A lot of props to public health and the underlying IT team that is keeping their website up to speed. It is being updated literally daily, and really serves as the point of verified information available to our county residents. There's a ton of information out there, or data out there, but what is presented on that website is verified and vetted by these folks sitting to my right and left, and is the best information available to our residents.
Okay, well, I thank you, I don't know, Mr. Italy, if it's you, to put it on the front page of the county website versus having to click through various things. So thank you for doing that. I talk to people frequently, as all of us do. Is there a way we could like get some flyers that give, the phone number, who to contact, or, information on the website for up-to-date information, and we could just pass them out or hand them out? I mean, I talk to people, and, I don't want to go to the website, or, they want more instantaneous. If there's a way we could get some, I'd appreciate it.
The press releases are on the website. They're in a PDF format where they can be printed.
I understand that, but I had to contact the Director of Health and Human Services because people were saying they weren't seeing them, so I wanted to know where they were. And again, it's as much community outreach as we can. You all are getting those phone calls, and I'm sure the questions you're getting are the same kind that we're getting. And, not everybody reads a press release or looks at the pine tree or my mother lode or whatever. And it's just another way to try and communicate, because the anxiety level is quite high.
Yes, ma'am. And so we can certainly print those and make those available. I'm kind of scared because I thought I saw I wanted to put back up the phone number.
Okay, I have more questions, but Mr. Stopper does. Go ahead.
Just to finish that point, there is a COVID-19 hotline that these folks have stood up for us. And is it in your presentation? Is the number there?
Yeah, it says it when you click on the main page. It's right up, the hotline number's right up at the top. I like that, thank you.
You can also call the main line for public health as well, at 745-6460.
Right, I mean, I have more questions, but my colleagues do. Go ahead, Mr. Stopper.
I was just going to back up Ms. Callaway on that. I mean, there are quite a few people out in the public that, watch the news, but they definitely don't click on the site for your press releases, and it's missed. So just a suggestion, possibly circulating it to all the schools and asking them to put it out in their Monday folders, or give it to the high schoolers so they all take it home. That's a broad amount of people that if they even put it on their sites and just send it to all the parents home with an email on it and an update, that you would get quite a bit more outreach going through that path also.
And this is it's really a communicating health information to the public, to other constituencies like the medical providers, the medical care system, the schools, churches. This is a multifaceted production. Yep. And so we're trying to meet the needs of outreaching those groups. For example, we did send information home to the schools, for the parents and for the school kids, updating them on what the situation is, information on hygiene and, self-preparedness activities, that kind of thing. But it sounds like we need to do a little bit better job of getting that information much more visibly, at people's fingertips in the community. That's what I'm hearing.
This is Kristen Stranger, Health and Human Services. I did want to let you know that the team right now is working on development of flyers per the suggestion, and they'd been working on them before, specifically targeting vulnerable populations and making sure those get out to the senior centers, additional information, so message delivered, sorry, apologies, message delivered, and we will continue to push that information out. Just as Dr. Kaleda and they had echoed, we have a multi-pronged communication approach, and so we'll amp this part up.
Supervisor Tuffenmiller.
I have a couple questions for Dr. Kaleda. Reading the very first part of this where it talked about it's a disease or a virus in animals and humans. Animals, can they transmit it to people if they have some strain of it, or?
Coronaviruses are what are called zoonotic illnesses, and that means that they can infect both humans and animals. So the potential for mutation, the potential for the development of novel strains of coronavirus is much higher because it can circulate in other animal species. Influenza is like that as well. Influenza, swine flu, is named that because it has a reservoir of pigs as a host that it can live in and mutate. So the answer to your question is partially that this virus can infect other species besides humans, but you can't catch it from a chicken. Or you can't get COVID-19 infection from another animal species. It has to be from a human to another human. And so I think that's kind of the common sense answer to your question.
Okay, that's a very good answer. The next question I have is, you were talking about community events, and in particular the Irish Days coming up, and because of Calaveras County, we have a lot of people that travel from outside Calaveras County to some of these events. And you were talking about putting aside that if people are sick, don't come. But if I'm infected, but I'm not showing any signs of being infected yet, it hasn't overtaken me, can I spread that even though I don't show signs at the time that I am sick?
Theoretically, yes, but we don't know exactly what the data and what the epidemiology is of this virus. We think that if people are not sick, they're in the phase where they might have contracted the illness, but they're not sick yet, they're not going to be contagious there's a very short window period between the time that a person is exposed. They'll typically show signs and symptoms of illness in about 5 to 9 days. And if they don't get sick within 14 days, then they're not going to get sick. But let's say a person was just exposed to the virus a day or two ago, and they're exposed to someone else, but they themselves are not sick yet. The potential for transmission is very low from an asymptomatic person to another person unless they, are showing signs of illness. That's when they are becoming communicable.
And then one other question I have, and just so I can understand, when we talk about the flu, we have a season. We say the flu season. Is this somewhere similar to that? Is there a season, or is this continue? Can it go into the summer months, the fall, the winter, and so forth? Do we know yet? Do we have any idea?
We don't know.
Yeah.
Some viruses do have a seasonal type of transmission or patterns of infection, like influenza. It would be it'd be very unlikely to get influenza during the summer, for example, because there's more of a seasonal pattern of influenza activity. With COVID-19 infection, because it's not technically an influenza virus, it's a coronavirus, we don't know yet what the epidemiology of this illness is going to look like. We haven't had enough time to be able to determine that yet. So the implications of that question would be that, well, is this just going to go away? Once it gets warmer, once we hit spring and summer, will this all just naturally go away on its own? We don't know the answer to that yet because some viral illnesses have more year-round activity.
And that makes it a great potential to continue to spread and go. Yeah. Thank you.
And Supervisor Toffenelli, to dovetail on that, when you're in that period where you may have been exposed and you're not sick yet, that is the primary reason that we are recommending wash your hands, because if you unknowingly transmit it and I wash my hands and kill the virus, I've stopped that infection.
Correct.
And that's why that personal hygiene piece is critical at this point.
Thank you.
Dr. Clayton, you said that the county obtains the sample and transports it to San Joaquin
Yeah,
and to the test lab. So is it the public health is taking the sample, or are our local physicians taking samples?
Local physicians wouldn't be responsible for transporting the specimen. We do have a system in place to transport medical specimens to outside laboratories. If a test isn't able to be done locally, there's a courier system. There are ways of moving samples from one laboratory to a larger laboratory that has testing capacity that we don't have. Such a system exists for the public health laboratory system. Usually, however, the COVID-19 tests are of such high priority and we want the results back as soon as possible. We have physically transported the specimens ourselves. Public health staff have transported the specimens to the appropriate public health laboratory where the testing is taking place.
Okay, but I think part of what I'm asking is who takes the sample? Does public health or does my personal physician take my sample?
No, your personal physician would consult with the public health department, with myself or my designee, to determine whether the person's an appropriate candidate for testing. If they are deemed an appropriate candidate for testing, then obtaining the test itself is not difficult. The local provider could do that, and then the public health, our department, will facilitate the specimen getting to the appropriate testing lab in one of a couple of different ways.
Okay, got it. If the school's closed, you're the king of the mountain right now, and you're the one that would be recommending that the schools close? Would they be doing it under your leadership on that?
That would realistically happen in one of a variety of ways. The first way would be making recommendations, like, for example, people who are at high risk, can be given health information that recommends that they not attend group gatherings, that they recommend not to go on a cruise ship, right? If a disease activity is occurring to the point where I feel that it wouldn't be prudent for people to get together in mass gatherings, I could issue recommendations to the vendors that hold such activities that those aren't a good idea, right? And I would expect vendors, once hearing the local health department is telling them that it's not a good idea to hold this event, that they would cancel them. The local health officer does have powers to order closure of institutions or large gatherings in the event that there wasn't cooperation with such recommendations.
So I'm going back to the schools and the 4 scenarios that you gave. The criteria is established by CDC?
Well, we get our main information and take our lead from the California Department of Public Health, CDPH.
So if we're in scenario 2, a local disease with the community, and you might isolate, the school might isolate part of their campus, that recommendation would come from you to the schools, correct?
That recommendation would be done very much in consultation with the schools, where we would get together with them, we would explain, scientifically what the situation is, and that together we would partner with them on the appropriate recommendations for closure.
Okay. You gave the information about what's available in the county, i.e. Mark Twain. Does Mark Twain have isolation rooms? Or an ICU room might not be an isolation room?
Well, an isolation room is used in very limited circumstances. If a patient is hospitalized, a patient's sick, they need to be confined to a hospital bed, Mark Twain Medical Center has 2 isolation rooms. One is in their regular medical surgical ward, and the other is one of their ICU beds. ICU bed 1 is a negative pressure isolation room. So this is a room that has environmental, it's designed in environmental controls where the air is not recirculated among the wider, hospital. The air is coming it doesn't suck, it doesn't blow air out of the room, it sucks air into the room. So that's what makes it a negative pressure isolation room. But, there's only a few of those in the entire community, and the majority of isolation for symptomatic COVID-19 patients would be occurring at home. And those patients wouldn't necessarily need hospitalization unless they were ill enough for that.
Now, I'm going to shift the subject a little bit, which sounds very uncaring, but how are we funding this? Is Mark Twain reimbursed, or would they be reimbursed? I mean, because there's a lot of chatter, and I'm not sure how we're managing this.
Well, there are established systems where hospitals and medical clinics and physicians get reimbursed for services they provide. So at this point, because we're not seeing a large influx of patients, the care system is getting reimbursed in the normal ways that they get reimbursed. There's no cost for COVID-19 testing on the few people that we have tested in the community. That testing is absorbed, cost of that testing is absorbed through the public health system. But, in the event of, a large increase in patients and hospital surge planning needs to be activated, reimbursements, become, not a central part of the decision-making process at that point.
I have one more. I'm interested, and I'm not sure if Mr. Ederle, you can tell me, what kinds of calls are we getting on our hotline?
A lot of our calls are originating around the guidance that's being pushed out specifically for their situations, be it the school, community, how do I take care of myself at home, the hand washing issues. We're not getting a whole lot in regards to specifics of healthcare. Most of it is basically our symptoms and concern for family and concern for how they need to take care of themselves.
Okay. Mr. Osborne?
Madam Chair, back to your question regarding the funding. From an OES standpoint, we have not exceeded our county abilities at this time, or our county capacity at this time. Should things become more serious, there are kind of 2 likely parallel tracks that would take place. Dr. Kaleda, should he deem it necessary, would declare a local public health emergency. And in turn, we would declare a local emergency. And then we would, much like PSPS or a wildfire, we would bring something before you guys, and then we would make a formal request to the state for California Disaster Assistance Act funding and or FEMA funding. And so those 2 tracks would slightly diverge if we, from a public health standpoint, they were within their capacity, but as a county from the OES standpoint, overall standpoint, we exceeded our capacity. there's a small likelihood that I would declare that as a disaster once we exceeded our abilities to have an avenue to seek those CDAA or FEMA funds.
Thank you. Just any other questions at the moment from my colleagues? I open it up for public comment. And if there are questions from the public, we'll just write the questions and answer them at the end.
I understand.
Mr.
Thank you.
Segala.
Al Segala, Taxpayer Association. I'd like to mention this would be an excellent program for our Taxpayer Alert. We interview people that have knowledge of significant things in the community, half-hour show, and the next one is, we'll be taping on the 26th of this month. So if one of you is particularly good speaker, you're invited. There's some things that I looked at that are not generally talked about in the media. There seems to be some nutritional aspects to how our bodies are able to fight off influenza and other diseases. There's a study now in China, 3-month study, it's already started, to test high dosage IV vitamin C. And there's a number of cases, I read the doctor reports, of quite a bit of success of high dosage vitamin C for fighting viruses, and also septic and other things that apparently when God designed us, he left out the ability for us to make our own vitamin C. He did a better job on dogs. Dogs can do that. And they automatically produce their own vitamin C, and they're able to have a better task in fighting viruses. There is 2 things that I know of that's in the drugstore over the counter. One is Airborne, and the other one is Zicam. These are basically vitamin C, and I know that Airborne works because at any time I have just a hint of coming down with a cold, I take that, and it's gone in a day. And which is what they claim in the plenty of studies that show that it does work. What's curious to me is why isn't this information widely known? Why aren't all the doctors who are going to be exposed to viruses making sure that their blood level of vitamin C is high enough to provide immunity? So I would like to see more studies on this by our local doctors and sharing that with the results of those studies with the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Segala.
Dr. Prapana Randall-Smith, doctorates in educational leadership, not medicine. Great presentation, and I commend you for all the efforts that you're taking. And I thought that the questions from the board were excellent. Although I hate to say that I think that our preparations are woefully inadequate, and here's why. According to the CDC, last year, our flu season that ran its course affected 42.9 million people. Of those, 61,200 were killed by the flu. 61,200 divided by 42.9 million is 0.0009%. According to our latest data, from the worldwide cases, which could be questionable because we don't know how much we can trust out of China and a few other countries, of the closed cases, that is, cases that ran their course, as of 10 o'clock this morning, 68,855. Of those, 4,095 perished. That's 6%. That's 6%. That is a massive number. If you look at currently infected cases, it's 12% of the 48,000 are in the hospital or they're serious or critical. Now, if we were to see this thing spread the way the flu spread last year, assuming the fatality rate is 3%, we're looking at almost 1.3 million people in the United States perishing. If the 6% holds, we're looking at about just under 2.6 million. This is serious, and the reason I bring this up is not to get everybody scared or to create a panic, but I would like to ask this board and every other county board in the country, every city council in the country, every legislature, to call upon the federal government to allocate significant resources. We spend hundreds of billions of dollars on national defense. This is a national security issue. We need to call on the feds to bring in the resources to build those centers, to bring in the doctors, to prepare for this thing. Because if it's as bad as it looks, we're going to need a massive response to it. And I think you're all doing a great job. I like what I hear about putting together possible centers, wherever you put them, whether they're in school gymnasiums or wherever, but we're going to need them. And Calaveras is not an island. It hasn't come here yet, but it's going to. Thanks. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Smith.
I'm Will Moore from San Andreas, and your slide here says that this disease is spread mainly by droplets. And I see China and Italy and so forth, people wearing face masks. And then I see expert opinions saying that, well, that's nonsense. Those face masks don't do any good to protect you from somebody else's disease. It's good to not spread it. And here, all the emphasis is on hand washing. Well, if this thing is spread by droplets from somebody's lungs and so forth, what's all the emphasis on hand washing and not on wearing masks?
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Any other public comments or questions on this item? I'm going to close public comment and bring it back. Could you just answer the question about the face masks and the spreading of droplets?
There's several mechanisms by which an illness can be transmitted from one infected person to a non-infected person. When it comes to respiratory viruses like COVID-19, the primary means is through droplet transmission. That's when a person coughs or sneezes. The virus can be suspended in a water droplet, and it can be passed a small distance. That's why close contact is defined as 6 feet or less. And then that can be inhaled by a person who breathes that in. A surgical, and there are different types of personal protective equipment that people can wear. A surgical mask is probably one of the lower forms of personal protective equipment. It's just a cloth mask that goes over the nose and mouth. And if a person coughs into that, that's enough, we think, to suspend the droplets that the virus is contained in and prevent that from being able to be transmitted from one person to another. Healthcare workers are recommended to have a little bit higher level of protection if they are dealing with a potential COVID-19 patient. That's called airborne precautions. Airborne precautions would be the healthcare provider doesn't wear just a regular surgical mask, but rather they wear something that's called an N95 respirator. That has a much finer level of filtration and can get rid of smaller particles than just a regular surgical mask. Also to wear a face shield, gloves, and a gown. So that level of protection we recommend for healthcare workers is called airborne precautions, and it's for people who are tending to a potentially contagious COVID-19 patient. So a regular surgical mask would be good for the majority of patients and the majority of situations of transmission in the community. And that's what we would recommend. If a person comes into an emergency room and they're coughing, there'll be a sign on the door that says, put on a surgical mask before you even sit down in this waiting room. And that provides, with this particular type of illness, a level of protection which we feel is adequate at this point.
Thank you. The comment or question from Mr. Segala about how he thinks airborne and Zicam are wonderful, and why don't doctors, I guess, promote this? You don't have to comment on it by brand, but is there any comments you want to make on that?
When it comes to recommendations for things that people can do to treat themselves, most physicians would want to see that there's scientific evidence behind that recommendation. When it comes to remedies like Zicam or vitamin C or zinc or other types of interventions, there haven't been scientific studies that have been performed that demonstrate the effectiveness of those interventions beyond just sort of hearsay and anecdotal experience. So for that reason, I wouldn't be on a solid footing to recommend those to the general public. When it comes to certain things like, say, taking glucosamine or chondroitin sulfate for knee pain, right? I have patients that do that, and they report to me that, "Doc, that helps my knee." I'm not going to argue with that person, right? I'm not going to tell them, "No, it doesn't. It's not helping you. There's no evidence that that helps you." That's fine if that individual feels that remedy helps them. They're perfectly welcome to do that. But I'm not in a position to recommend that to the wider public or patient population without more scientific evidence that shows that that's effective.
Okay, thank you. The other comment was Dr. Smith saying we're unprepared for a major disaster and to call on the feds. And I know there's cooperation now and there's lots of talk. Mr. Osborne, did you want to address that in any way?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, that tract follows the local emergency. All disasters or incidences are local. That's where they start, and they start with us. And once we are affected to a point that we can no longer, within our bandwidth, if you will, handle that local emergency, we would first reach out to the inland region of California, and then California, and from California to the federal government. I am aware that the federal government is providing some funding. I believe it's being funneled through CDC at this point. So the federal government is supporting our local operations through several ways, not only monetarily, we don't know necessarily us specifically yet, but through that money stream with CDC, as well as providing us with resources to help us make sure it stays local.
Okay, thank you. Do my colleagues have any other questions? I'd like to thank Mark Twain for being here. We appreciate it. Is there anything that you would like to say? You don't feel obliged, unless you have some stress balls you want to hand out? No.
As long as you wash your hands first.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. We appreciate your being partners in this. If there's no other questions or comments, we will close this topic and we will take a 5-minute recess. Thank you. We're going to convene the meeting again. Okay. I'd like to bring the meeting back to order. Madam Clerk, I was about to say Chair. Again.
Thank you. Item 19 is from the Administrative Office to adopt Debt Advisory Committee recommendation for HVAC replacement project financing.
Okay, Mr. Alt.
Good morning, Madam Chair and Madam Clerk and members of the board and public. Before we get started here this morning, you'll notice we do have a visitor here today. I'd like to introduce and welcome Mr. Bobby Chung, from K&N Financial. He's here with us today to present. But before we get into the details of his presentation, I'd like to provide some context to why we're here today. This item is before the board to consider financing options for the proposed HVAC replacement project. HVAC replacement project is not new to us. It's a long-standing issue for the county. The item was first presented to the Board of Supervisors in 2015. It was also presented again in 2018 and 2019. And in those meetings, the board confirmed the HVAC replacement was a priority of the board and subsequently set the project as a priority for the Facilities Ad Hoc Committee. The HVAC replacement project has been presented to the Facilities Ad Hoc several times. The Ad Hoc recommended moving the project forward to the board. As you recall, in December of 2019, the board heard presentation about the merits of the HVAC replacement project and supported moving the project to the Debt Advisory Committee. The Debt Advisory Committee has had 2 subsequent meetings in January 2020, which you've already heard a report about, where the Debt Advisory Committee heard details about the specifics of the HVAC replacement project and subsequently recommended that the CAO bring in a financial advisor and provide financing options for consideration. As a result of that recommendation, I engaged the services of K&N Financial, who is here today, to develop options and present to the Debt Advisory Committee. On February 26, 2020, the Debt Advisory Committee heard the presentation from K&N Financial, considered the options that were presented by them, and made recommendation to the board that's before us today. The recommendation for consideration was built from K&N's background. I've already introduced our representative here from K&N Financial. He is a registered municipal advisor, and K&N Financial is a firm that works with counties throughout the state of California on similar types of financing. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Bobby now to have him proceed with his presentation and the details of the financing that's been recommended.
Great. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. My name is Bobby Chung. I'm with K&N Public Finance. I'm very happy to be here this morning to talk a little bit about the project and the potential financing and some of the discussion that happened at the DAC meeting that I attended right here a couple weeks ago. I prepared about 8 or 9 slides that I'd like to walk through, but please feel free to stop me at any time if you have any questions. So since this is the first time I've spoken before your board, just a quick note about who I am and what role we play. As your CAO mentioned, I am a municipal advisor, and my role really is to be an advocate for you, the county, the public agency, your staff, when interfacing with the public finance market. So I am not a bond underwriter or anything like that. I'm not an investment banker. I am here representing your interests, and I have a fiduciary responsibility to put your interests ahead of my own. Okay, so we take that that responsibility very seriously, and as you see, I think we put quite a bit of thought into this recommendation, and I'm happy to answer any questions surrounding that. We did look at your HVAC replacement projects, and we looked at a couple of methods of sale, including the direct purchase lease method of sale versus a public sale of certificates of participation, which your county has done in the past. And as your CEO mentioned, we have done this type of analysis for a number of counties up and down the state. Our firm works with, I think, about 34 counties of 58 that are in California. This next slide is a brief overview of the project itself, at least the way we understand it. The main goal of this project is to replace 54 air conditioning units, a couple of boilers, and really install this control system to help make the county's energy use more efficient. The total cost of the project is estimated to be $2.9 million, with the county potentially contributing $400,000 of cash up front, therefore reducing the net financing need to be about $2.5 million. And the rest of this page, potential benefits of the project. This is taken from a presentation from Compass Energy Solutions, which we are not affiliated with in any way. But really, I think this first point here was really stressed at the DAC meeting, where to come into compliance with the EPA mandate to remove existing HVAC units with this R22 substance. Moving on to slide 3, this is a summary of the proposed HVAC financing scenario that was moved by your DAC about a week and a half ago. So here on the left, I list a couple of key assumptions. Number one, we are using the lease financing structure with a 10-year term. So this utilizes the county's ability to enter into lease contracts in order to complete the financing. This does assume a AA category issuer credit rating, which is the county's existing rating. Just a quick note, that is a very strong rating, and therefore you're able to borrow money at a relatively low interest rate. This analysis assumes market rates as of February 11th, and as folks know, there's been quite a bit of volatility in the financial markets, to say the least. This interest rate that I'm showing here of 2.20%, again, was from February 11th. I made some calls literally yesterday, given the volatility, and I think that this rate, if we were to go out and get a rate today, would be lower, closer to 2%, if not a little bit under 2%, given the current interest rate environment. But this is structured to be very conservative, level payments over a course of 10 years, and no capitalized interest or deferral of principal amortization or anything like that. And here on the sources and uses on the right side of the page, you see the par amount, which is the borrowing amount. You see the $400,000 of cash coming in as a source of funds. And then on the uses, $2.89 million for the project itself. The cost of issuance is an estimate, $90,000. That includes the various costs of the professionals, including our firm, a bond counsel firm, a placement agent firm, to help effectuate the financing. And the $359,000, that just brings us up to a nice even $1,000 amount. And the key point here really is the average annual payments, $290,000 based upon this 2.2% interest rate assumption. Let me pause right there. Any questions on this slide?
Yeah, do I understand that this is for be a lease? This option is a lease?
This is structured as a lease financing.
And what happens at the end of 2030?
At the end of the lease financing, the county completely owns all of the equipment financed by the lease. So this is not like a like a car lease where you have to give the car back. This is mostly structured as a financing lease.
Okay.
So you miss a payment, they repossess on the air conditioners?
Well, that is a good question. And since we haven't actually started on this transaction, we haven't discussed what the leased asset would be for this transaction. I've been kind of assuming that it would be the equipment itself, and obviously that would be logistically difficult for the bank to come in and repossess 54 air conditioning units that are spread across county facilities. It's more of a legal concept to help effectuate the financing.
Or they could ask for a building, but we've already loaned our buildings because of the sheriff's office, if I remember.
We do have some arrangements in that way, but our other certificates of participation are pretty low. The
Right.
general obligation bond isn't necessarily backed by our properties. So it's not as if we don't have available properties to consider in that way.
The DA's office, we could give them that. Please proceed, Mr. Town.
Thank you. On the next slide, I'll speak a little bit more about the recommended method of sale, the direct purchase. And that's where a single financial institution, usually a commercial bank, would come in and basically loan you all of the money. And that's in contrast to a public sale, which is how the county has sold your other debt issuances in the past. We find that for relatively smaller transaction, usually $5 million and less, and for relatively short transactions, 15 years, 10 years, usually the direct purchase method of sale is more economic. So while you might pay a little bit higher interest rate, actually, for the direct purchase method of sale, the lower cost of issuance more than offsets that higher interest rate. So in a direct purchase method of sale, we would work with a placement agent, who's another consulting firm, to conduct an RFP process to find a bank that would give the county the best terms, conditions, and interest rates, kind of the combination of all three. And with other processes similar to this, we've gone out to about 20 or so banks that are in this space, and of that, usually we get like anywhere from 3 to 7 responses. So there would be a competitive process to find the lender that would give you the lowest interest rates and the best terms. We, along with county staff, would then work to negotiate those key terms and conditions and try and get you the best deal that we possibly can. And as I mentioned, under a direct purchase method of sale, there's lower costs. So there's no disclosure document that needs to be prepared. There's no credit rating, so you don't have to go to S&P or Moody's to pay them to assign a credit rating to you. The bank that you end up selecting will do credit work to make sure that the county is indeed a AA category issuer, but they won't charge you for it through a separate fee. And I think the last point on this page, less staff time dedicated to the financing process, that's also pretty important. Again, you don't have to prepare an official statement. There's no credit rating process, and it's a bit of a more streamlined process. This next slide, page 5, this is an index of tax-exempt 10-year interest rates to help illustrate the recent movement in the market. This chart goes all the way back to the year 2000, and this is a AAA general obligation bond index, so the indicative rate is a little bit lower than what I just showed you. But nonetheless, it's an indication of where we are now, right? And where we are now is at the lowest point that this index has ever been, at 0.93%. And that's a function really of all of the really the global financial panic around the COVID crisis. Folks are, as I'm sure you're aware of, really pulling money out of the stock market and seeking the haven of safer assets like the bond market. And so the bond market benefits from that flow of capital from the stock market into the bond market, and issuers and folks borrowing money have the benefit of a lower interest rate environment. So we are literally at all-time lows the last time I looked at this chart. I personally refinanced my mortgage last week, and I should have waited a little bit longer, but that's not relevant. On the next slide, the county does have a debt policy that we looked at and addressed. Again, we are recommending the lease financing structure here. If the county said, hey, I want to go with the public method of sale instead, that's fine. You would then issue certificates of participation, which is still a lease structure, but the legal structure is a little bit different. I commented already upon the method of sale regarding the direct purchase, private placement. We did the analysis and showed that when looking at a direct purchase versus a public sale, the county would end up paying less total principal and interest on a direct purchase method of sale as compared to a public sale. So that is our recommendation. Your debt policy does have this concept of a carrying charge where annual debt service should not be higher than 5% of operating expenditures. So I have a separate page on this, so I'm actually going to punt on that until the next page. And then finally, other considerations that were considered: urgency, timing of project, and also kind of taking a bigger picture look at the county's long-term capital plan. And I've got a specific slide on that as well to address. So when looking at the carrying charge of the county, we have to look at all of the county's outstanding debt at this point, and we understand that to be two transactions. The first, your 2016 general obligation bonds. That benefits from a ad valorem property tax passed by the voters. So that is actually not a general fund obligation. That is your responsibility. But the 2016 refunding certificates of participation are a general fund obligation. So when this calculation that I look at in the lower left, we looked at just your general fund backed obligation, the 2016 refunding COPs. We believe that that payment is right around $420,000 for fiscal 18, and based on fiscal 18 general fund expenditures of about $45 million, that ratio comes out to be 0.93%, so well under the 5% maximum dictated by your policy. And since we have an indicative rate for your HVAC borrowing, I added on the $290,000 to that figure to come up with a 708, and that as a percentage of 45 million. Obviously, if you're incurring more debt, that will increase your ratio, but we think to about 1.57%. Still a fairly manageable level in our view, and certainly underneath the 5% limit set by your policy. And your this little chart on the right here, the blue is your 2016 COP debt service, and the orange is the 10 years of the HVAC lease, if you so choose to incur that debt. On page 8, there was a good discussion at your DEC regarding the importance of taking, I think, a more global look at the county's approach and future capital needs and the potential for debt borrowing, if necessary, at that time. So at this point, we believe, based on Standard & Poor's debt ratio metrics that they publish, and the county's existing low debt burden, and I think the county's low debt burden is still true even after you would borrow the money for the HVAC borrowing. From a capital markets perspective, there is still some capacity to issue more debt in the future, right? Our firm can actually help the county do a little bit more analysis to really make sure that conclusion is true. We've helped other counties develop a long-range capital plan by working with county staff to think about, okay, in the next 3, 5, 7 years, what capital needs do I anticipate, would come up? And we think about, okay, what other sources of revenue might be available to help offset those needs? Are there grants that we could access? Are there other sources of revenue that we could help develop over time? And we build out what we call a capital cash flow model. So we work with county staff to develop project cost estimates, project timing estimates, priorities, which projects should get done first, second, third, and then we just build out a cash flow model to help you determine when and if it's appropriate to borrow debt in the future to fund these projects. This is, again, something that we did pretty recently for some of your neighbors. We then take that cash flow model, we put it into what we call a debt affordability model, or what we call a DAM. to forecast how that new debt might impact the county's debt ratios and financial ratios, and if it could impact, your rating, and really kind of think about what that means from the market's perspective on affordability. We haven't done any of this for you yet because I don't think that we have direction regarding the timing of projects or the costs or priorities. And at this point, I'm not sure it's necessary given the county's already low debt levels. But this is something that we could help you do. And frankly, this is how we reached out to the county initially a couple of years ago. So my last slide here in terms of next steps, if your county board decides to move forward with this, we'd spend the next week or so finalizing the financing team, bringing on a bond counsel firm and a placement agent. We'd go ahead and conduct that lender RFP process to make sure that the bank that we do find is giving you the best deal possible. We'd spend about a month to 6 weeks drafting the actual loan documents, and then all of this would come back to your board for approval. There would basically be a financing resolution. There would basically be forms of the lease documents with the bank that has all of the preliminary terms and conditions that have been already negotiated with the bank for your final consideration. Only after that point would we actually then close the financing. So that concludes my presentation. In the appendix, maybe just real quick, I included the full table of all of the 6 financing scenarios that we presented to the DAC, different terms, different methods of sale, and as you can see, this scenario 1 was what got recommended to your board, which I think is the most cost-effective option overall. So at this point, I'll stop and see if there are any questions.
Okay. Do any of you have questions for Mr. Chang? Pardon? Mr. Topanelli?
So while we're on this particular slide, if I could add some context, this is our timeline for just the financing, but there's other pieces that will happen. First, this is a conceptual piece. This is an approval of the financing. As you look to finalize the financing team and method of sale and the RFP in our policy that already outlines the DAC as the group to be able to review the RFP. So the recommendations the DAC has made already are in isolation. There's more pieces to come and they have more input on the process. There are also some woven pieces with this with Compass Energy Group was mentioned, and we've talked a lot about the requirements under 4217. So there's still multiple pieces that need to come back to the board interlaced with this. One of which will be first the findings for energy savings that are required under 4217. Those will be reviewed by the ad hoc committee on Thursday, and all of the detail behind the energy savings will go to the ad hoc for consideration and then ultimately to the board in the first April meeting. There's public notice that's required for that. We have to notice 2 weeks in advance to the public that we're going to be making these findings. So that hasn't been done yet, and it won't be done until after we review it first with the ad hoc. Additionally, there's also a public notice that needs to be done for the use of the Energy Services Company, which has given us the opportunity to consider this project in the totality. If we consider the project in a different way, say 3-year layout of the project, we can't use the ESCO in the way that we've engaged them. We'd have to break it up into separate projects and do all the findings, separately for each distinct project. So we still need to do the public notice and the contract for the ESCO, and that again would line up with the 4217 findings. And then last for the County Board of Supervisors considering the finance resolution, or required under 4217 also to do public notice on that as well. So these are all pieces of the process that we will fit in this general timeline and continue to, provided the board gives direction to do so, continue to march this project forward. But there's more detail besides just the financing piece that I wanted the board to know before we move forward.
So if I understand you, if we break the project up into two parts, or three, whatever, we still have to go through this same process each time?
If we use 4217, if we do our normal bid process and we break the project up and go through our regular RFP, we can break this project up in any way we want. If each distinct project is big enough for us to engage in ESCO and get the economy of scale, then we may consider that. But if we were to break it into smaller distinct pieces, we could break it up over 3, 5, or 10 years for that matter. In smaller parts, it's probably not likely to go get $800,000 or $1 million worth of financing. We'd most likely be responsible. I mean, we can do it, but we're talking about a lot of cost of issuance to borrow $800,000 or $1 million. And at some point, the cost of issuance of financing is over and above the value of the money that we get. So as we break the project into smaller pieces, we're looking at taking it on the general fund. And the general fund's an important consideration in this case. In the example, the $400,000 comes from money that's already budgeted. It hasn't been from the HVAC budget. It hasn't in the last 10 years been $400,000, but it continues to increase. I think at the last DAC meeting that Kathy said the last 2 years were $400,000. It's continuing to go up because our HVAC systems are continuing to age. So $400,000 isn't a cap, but if I use that as a cap, our financing would be $290,000 instead of a budget of $400,000 that could escalate over time. And the savings from, and the ad hoc will see this, but I presented it at the board in December when we talked about the project. Our updated data as we zero in on the project is $100,000 of actual dollar for dollar cost savings for energy savings. And so we have a net of about $200,000 of obligation where we currently have a $400,000 commitment in budget. And some of those conditions would exist if we did the project in different ways as well. So there certainly are other options. This isn't the only way to do it. This is the option that's been on the table since about September when the board asked me to move forward on a feasibility study, and I brought it forward to both the ad hoc and the board. So we've been talking about this type of project for several months without request from ad hoc or the board to consider different options. That's why I've walked it forward to this point, but there certainly are other options and ways to do the project.
So what does that do to the system? They all need to be replaced. How is that going to be determined?
So the systems have all been identified. They're all aged units that have R22 in them. We have other units, I'll just talk generally, this is only about half of the units. So we have another half that don't have R22 in them and aren't as old. We feasibly could look at a financing like this and plow the money back into, I'll just use the term loosely just to be simple, into an account or back into those other units to replace those. So we're on a cycle where we're replacing those units. But this is only about half, and we still have to consider the other half going forward and how we would budget for them.
Okay. Are there any questions besides mine? Otherwise, I'm going to ask for any public comment on this item.
Good morning, Board. Kathy Gomes. I just have, I was the lone abstention during Debt Advisory Committee, and I just want to explain why I abstained. Bobby did a great presentation.
Did you abstain or did you vote no?
I abstained.
Oh, okay.
And the reason I did is I feel like you taking an action today in advance of doing the findings, which has not occurred yet, would be inappropriate. And CAO Alt has already discussed that a little bit in terms of the energy savings. The other reason that I abstained is I really feel twice the Debt Advisory Committee looked at this, but we looked at it in a vacuum. I wanted to look at overall potential county debt coming up, and that was never an option. It's great that Bobby has offered to do that. I would advise strongly that you do that. You've got DA building, animal service building, health and human service lease, which expires May of 2021, and that's 6.7 million of potential borrowing, and you need to look at all of it at one point.
So if I may, in response to that, as the chair of the DAC, we specifically asked why the abstention, and what Kathy said at the time was, I don't agree with the project, not the financing. Specifically said you abstained because you didn't agree with the project. I have said to this board and to DAC, and will continue to say here, we need a more strategic financing plan. We absolutely need that. But we're talking about, and what my point in DAC was and is here, we're talking about a DA building that isn't programmed yet, so we have no idea square footage, which means we have no idea what cost, which means we have no idea what debt. We don't have any of that on the animal services building as well. Animal services building has other potential financing options such as general obligation bond, parcel tax, philanthropy, etc. Those are all the kinds of things that we take into account in a strategic financing plan. So I don't disagree with Kathy at all. Actually, I wholeheartedly agree, with the exception that we've been talking about this project since 2015. The board's reviewed it, the ad hocs reviewed it, and this frankly is why we get to a point in projects that never get done. We get to the point that we don't complete things. We talk about them and we don't complete them. This project has 56 units with R22, which is banned substance, in them. This project also has HVAC units that in some cases are over 40 years old and their life expectancy is 20. In some cases, what's been included in this project are units that aren't going to turn on. We already know they will not turn on. So we either unpack it and take the $400,000 and replace the units and put this project off, and we run the risk of either paying $400,000 that's budgeted this year and maybe $800,000 or $1 million next year because those 40-year-old units are going to continue to fail, or we contain it within a financing structure that's $290,000 over the next 10 years, and then the board uses its discretion on what to do with extra $200,000 a year we're saving from the financing and the energy savings, up to and including other priority projects, or funneling that money into cycling out the next set of units that also needs to be cycled out. So that's why the Debt Advisory Committee's recommendation was you need to look at this in total on how it would impact the county's future ability to do projects. Well, if we ask them, and I will, hypothetically, can your firm do a projection on how much debt we may need if we don't know the size of the project or the cost of the project or the ways that we would pay for the project?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer. We could develop ranges if you tell us ranges, but we would need some direction regarding cost, timing, along those lines.
And so until we get to those kind of rough order of magnitude through the ad hoc, which we are, we're scoping the DA's building now. We're bringing back on Thursday the animal services building. So we're starting to drive in at what some of those things would be. But frankly, my fear is we won't have the completion on those things enough to get a strategic financing plan before we need to roll some of these HVAC units out. So we're kind of at the point where within the next meeting or 2 or 3, we need to figure out whether we're actually going to complete projects or set the project aside and put it all together with a strategic financing package, which probably, given where we're at on animal service in the DA's building, probably puts us off at least a year, if not 2.
Can I just make one other comment? If I were asked whether to use borrowing to replace 54 units, I would say no. And the reason I would say no is I think borrowing for a building, completely appropriate. Borrowing on the HVAC units when you could $400,000 this year, chip some out, $400,000 next year, take care of some. Then what you're doing is you've got staggered replacement, because 54 units now means 10 years from now, 15 years from now, you've got 54 units that you have to replace again. So that's why I would say no if I were to
be asked.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
Will Moore, Valley Springs. A little curious as to whether this is a straight up loan, or is this a line of credit thing that you can draw on as needed if you need it. And on page 4 here, there's a RFP process. I don't know what that acronym stands for.
Request for proposal. Any other public comments on this? No? Okay. Does the board have any questions? Mr. Mills?
How much time you give me?
I don't know. Madam Clerk, could you put the timer on him?
I'm just wondering how deep we want to dig into the financing when we really haven't decided or fully understood the sense of urgency. And I know that several of the staff have received from me a copy of what is our 453A. Simply to remove R22 units because it's somehow a banned substance, so those units are poisoned, we got to get rid of them, it's craziness to me. My NARDA certificate goes back to 1995 in refrigeration. So I'm not talking like I don't know what I'm talking about. I think we need to look at all of our options. And what would be the appropriation if, for instance, this company or Global Energy doesn't get this done? How is the board appropriating to paying them for the work that they've done? You alluded, Bobby, to the markets. You remember the last couple days was because of an oil fight between Saudi Arabia and Russia. It had nothing to do with coronavirus. So the market has an instability that's inherent right now. And anybody who tries to guess what it is either going to make a lot of money or become very poor very quickly. So I'm not going to be into the fear mongering point of this. We look at 54 units, AC units. How big are they? Because we're averaging $150,000, $160,000 a unit. That's the cost here. 2 boilers, 2 gas units. I would like to know the age of each R22 unit. I'd like to know their size, because I think that has something to do with it. And are these units, because I know I have somebody sitting in the audience who's involved in the space plan. How do these units that are currently thinking about being replaced fit into that space plan? Are we talking about putting units in places where they're not going to be needed anyway? I want to talk about funding and replacing units in stages, and I know that Kathy, you'd alluded to that, like a fleet maintenance program kind of thing. Because when you go up to R410, your pressure's double, which means that you're going to have line sets that are going to have problems if you're not going to replace them as part of these units. We're going to also be ending up tying up future borrowing when we do this, if we take a lump sum like this. And I know that on page 7, you had talked about, let me get back to it here so I've got it. I circled it. The carrying charge ratio. in essence, it's doubling. It's a doubling of that charge. It's important for us to really look at all options when we scope something. We're just talking about funding options for one specific type of project here. I would like to talk about what are all of our options, and I think the Debt Advisory Committee, for those of you sitting in the back of the room, fell very short in giving us all of the information we needed to make a sound decision here. You should have discussed all options, not just an option. Because I cannot make a decision to fund based upon what you're giving me today. And I won't support it. You know, how did we find Compass Energy Solutions? How did we find KNN? And what do these two companies stand to make on this deal when it's all said and done? Who's going to pay that, or how's that figured into our obligations? I'm just kind of giving you some ideas of where I'm going here. But R22 does have an alternate solution with R453A. And if we're going to run in a scare tactic saying we've got to take all those R22 units out, you're wasting my time. I will not support it.
So may I respond to most of the questions that have already been answered? The presentations have come before this board already on almost all of those questions. We showed the list of the units, we showed the tonnage, we showed the age. It was on that screen. We showed them at the ad hoc committee who recommended the projects. I explained how I qualified Compass Energy Group. I didn't explain how we qualified KNN because I was given a task to engage a financial advisor. We have to have a financial advisor who's a third-party fiduciary that gives us good information on what our financing are. They work with half the counties in California. They do these things every day. Their references check out pretty solid. If it's the responsibility of the board and or the debt advisory committee to do reference checks on energy services companies or financial services advisors, then that should be clear when we talk about it in the board meeting, because at each step of the way, the ad hoc and the board has said, and the debt advisory committee has said, take these steps. And at each step each time we take a step, we get back to the point that, oh, we can't get this done, which is exactly why the jail stands as it does, right next to us here. On the issue of R22, they aren't scare tactics, it's fact. You can Google R22 and find that there's a federal ban on the substance. There is a replacement substance. It actually costs 3 times as much as reconditioned R22 does. We've vetted that. We've gotten the data on it. I'll bring it back to the ad hoc. I only got it at the last board meeting we presented it, so I haven't had opportunity to bring it here because we're not talking about the HVAC project. We're talking about the financing of the project. The debt advisory committee, however they may feel, is certainly up to each individual debt advisory committee member. However, the policy is clear. The policy says that the debt advisory committee considers projects approved by the board. It didn't say the debt advisory committee would take on a strategic financing plan. That's the prerogative of the board. So if I were short with any of the debt advisory committee members, my apologies, but I was clear in saying I'm not going to overstep the boundaries in my role or the debt advisory committee's role when it's the board's role. And the last piece I'll touch on about the project is I'm taking the recommendations of industry experts, both internal and external. Patrick's here, Dave Allen's been involved in the project. We had 3 different firms come out and assess all of these units and set a priority list for us that's in this list of units. So no matter how we unwind the project or what downside we find to the project, every project we do has a risk. We've assessed the risk and we're assessing the benefit, and the decision is before the board whether or not they want to address this project or not.
Mr. Martin, is there anything you would like to address on this? And please introduce yourself for the record. Thank you.
Hi, Patrick Martin, Facilities Manager.
I don't think it's my position to convince anybody on finance options. What I can tell you is we have missed the opportunity for phased installation of these units. They should have been done when the campus was opened in the 60s and a program put into place that is standard practice for a main facility. So because we haven't done that, we have to replace the units. Right now I have 2 units that will not come on, and I can almost guarantee that 2 to 3 more will fail as soon as we go to turn them on this spring. So the cost is real of what we have right now. As far as the phased replacement in the future, I've also made comment to the Debt Advisory Committee. The units are of varying size, from 1-ton to 20-ton units. Those units are used at different rates, they're taxed at different rates, and that's why if you look at our list now, we have units that are 40 years old and going down to 20. So units will last longer on this go-around than other units depending on the use, the amount of use. So if we do things right, replace the units now, we will be replacing some of those units at the beginning of their longevity, which is 15 years, in year 16, 18, 20, and so on. So we will, in essence, already be setting up a phased replacement program for these new units. The cost savings by doing it now could be used to look at the units that we currently have that are in their life cycle that will become out of commission before this new group does. So in essence, today is the day we start on a phased installation program by approving this project. I can't stress upon you how much this concerns me for the overall well-being of this county, because it's been my #1 priority since I've got here is to address the climate control needs of the campus, and it is getting worse by the month. So my suggestion is wholeheartedly, we need to do this.
Thank you, Mr. Martin.
Patrick, don't walk away. I just have a question because I'm trying to find it on the internet. What is the current reconditioned price on R22?
It changes daily. It's on the commodities market.
That's
so you would have to literally, like gold, check it every day. And with the market the way it has been the last few days, I could only speculate that it's gone up quite drastically. But yes, the cost of R22. And another thing that I had mentioned is prior to December 31st last year, when it became a truly banned substance and not just a regulated, I was allocating a lot of money at the end of my fiscal budget to buy material for the following year. Now it's become so expensive that if I would need monies allocated to my budget for the sole purpose of R22 purchase. Because I can no longer carry that within my standard budget.
So 453A is currently $10 a pound on the market, and it's a direct conversion. Just take out the R22. You don't need to replace condensers, evaporators, TXVs, caps, or anything. Why aren't we looking at that as a short-term option?
Well, again, I'll use the analogy, you have a 40-year-old car, and you love this car, and the engine blows. So you decide to go ahead and put the new engine in it. Well, the new engine now puts additional wear on the transmission and all the other old parts. So that is what my understanding is with this conversion, is it's done, but you're still taxing the unit differently and wearing the unit differently with a different refrigerant. So there are parts that need to be replaced. There are parts that are worn that will fail as a result of this conversion. So yes, you could put money into a 40-year-old unit to convert it over to try to keep it on life support for an additional 2 years, but I don't think that that's a good expenditure of funds.
Well, you're saying taxing it differently. We don't even need to convert the oil to POE or anything like that. So these temperature pressure relationships are identical. Your air balance is identical. If you think it's differently, I sure would like to hear it.
Yeah,
But I
and-
can't see it from the data that they're giving me.
And I would not stand here to be an expert on this new alternative, but I do know equipment is equipment. And the older the equipment, and if you start replacing belts, pulleys, motors, things of that nature, then they tax on that older unit because it is an older unit. So, like I said, you can, there are other alternatives. I just don't see it as being a long-term good objective for us.
Mr. Stopper, did you?
I do recall us going over the possible savings and everything and the cost of the units. My big thing is, look, we can talk about replacing 450 or R22 with 453A all day. Some of these units are 40 years old, correct?
Correct.
They're past their lifespan. Their lifespans aren't 40 years, correct?
Very much so.
So at this point, one part or another is going to break down on these units in the near future. If they, you already gave us example of ones that aren't going to turn on this summer. So we're at a point now where we can't necessarily cool a building, which is part of the public safety and health of our employees, correct?
Correct.
So we're past the time due to replace the units. It's not whether it's R22 or 453A. It's the units need to be replaced.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Do you have anything you want to say?
Well, I am a member, the other member is not here of the ad hoc committee, and we've had these discussions. The couple issues that I have, one is this item on our agenda was only the staff report. There was nothing attached to it. There was nothing. I sent an email to the CAO asking for additional information, never got it, never returned my email. I'm being asked to go into debt for 10 years here based on a PowerPoint presentation that I haven't had a chance to analyze, I haven't had a chance to look at, I haven't had a chance to do anything with other than sit here and listen. I can't make a decision today based on a 10-minute presentation to me to put us in 10 years worth of debt. I would ask that now that we're giving this information and any other information that I would need between now and possibly next Tuesday or the following Tuesday, at least get the information to me when I ask for it so I can analyze everything I need to look at in order to make a decision on this. I'm well aware of all the units. I've been involved with Patrick. I know what needs to be done. I'm aware of it. There's some other options that I thought we could do. But I can't make a decision today in 10 minutes for 10 years of debt based on not having the ability to go back and do some research and everything that's being presented to me. So I would ask that at least and Jack's not here, the other member of the ad hoc committee, so I would at least ask this board at least to continue this for a week or 2 weeks so we can have time to go over the information presented to us.
We won't have it be 3-4 weeks, because that'll be our third, so we won't meet again until April 14th.
We have two more meetings this month.
We have two more meetings this month, Marita.
The 17th, the 24th.
Right,
Yeah.
so we
Okay.
could make the 24th.
Do you want to make it, well, I have my concern, I don't have a problem with Supervisor Tuffanelli saying, and to me, there's a golden opportunity at the moment. Interest rates are really low, and for whatever reason, it could be the oil crisis, it could be the corona, I don't care. It's nothing that I can control. I just know that we have an opportunity to do something at a very low interest rate for something that needs to be done, that I do agree, we have talked this to death for years. So either we do something or we just say, well, let's look at it some more. And let's analyze it and let's just do so many units and then break it up, and I'm done with that. But I really respect what Supervisor Toffanelli said. And the fact that Supervisor Garamendi's on debt advisory also. Was he at the meeting?
Yes,
Mr.
he
Alt?
was, and he voted to move
Okay.
it forward.
I'd like to, I'm not sure the proper term, move this out to the 17th of March. Is that acceptable? That's our next meeting.
You want to pull the board?
No, I'm just saying I'd like to do it.
Is anybody opposed
Do
to
you
it?
all, anybody,
No,
you
we're not
guys
opposed.
agree with me?
I'm not opposed.
I'm not opposed to it either.
I think we'll give, I'll
Okay,
give.
1, 2, 3,
I'm
4.
not opposed.
What
Okay,
ideally, what
fine.
I'd like to have, Chair, I would
pardon?
like to ideally have is that staff look at the questions and the issues that I brought up to be sure that they're properly vetted and answered so that I can make a good decision.
Well, do you want the information that was presented to us before about the tonnage?
Yes, I'd
You
like
want
to have
that
all of the
again?
details laid out so that I can look at
Okay,
it individually.
so the information that's already been presented to us, when was it, in December? You want that again? Okay, Mr. Alt, could you please resend that information to Mr. Mills?
I'll package up everything that we have. We
Okay.
also have the ad hoc on Thursday where we're going to get some new information. I can't push that out to the board if it's
No,
not
that's-
posted to the public. So for clarification, Supervisor Toffanelli asked me for the data yesterday.
Okay.
The Debt Advisory Committee and the completion of this presentation was after our IQM2 deadline. So I can't push things out to the board that weren't on the agenda. I can't, I've done it once
Okay.
before, and on advice of the clerk, I can't send you data that the public doesn't have access to, and I knew you were going to get the presentation
Okay.
today, so.
That's fine.
What I would like to have, though, it would be helpful, is the specific questions. We have the questions about the replacement product. I can already answer that question. When Supervisor Mills gave that to me on a particular day, I went back to the ESCO that we have under contract to work with the 3 vendors who did the work to give us their analysis on it. And what I can tell you, I'm no expert, far less than even Patrick is, and he didn't want to talk about the replacement project. But to put politely, what they said is it's not as simple as put one product in for the other. There are other changes that have to happen. It's not a simple unleaded for regular type of conversion, and their advice, even though they have potential of getting the business through the ESCO, their advice was just what Patrick said. It's not a one-for-one change. You have some other changes you need to make on the systems, and when you do it, you still have 44-year-old units. So I'll get more detail on that, but that specific question I tried to address. If there's questions about the financing, very particular questions about the financing, those would be helpful to know, so that I can find out from K&N in advance and get the answers, unless there's an expectation that K&N come back and do the same presentation again.
Are
or
we
if
paying
just
for
is
your
available.
time? We don't want you coming back.
We
I
pay
think
for
we're fine.
everybody's time. That's-
No. Okay, that's fair. And I guess that I would request of the board, unless you have a specific question that you want to ask now, after you look at this, that we send our questions to Mr. Alt. Do not send them to all of us, please. Just send them to Mr. Alt. Did you want a copy, counsel? They're just normal questions in the course of...
It depends on whether or not you want it to be attorney-client privilege. I'm happy to be a part of the discussions, but I just would echo the chair's recommendation, obviously, that they not get distributed amongst yourselves.
Okay, fine. So we will be moving this item out to the next meeting.
And I'll get together with Mr. C.A. Alt
And he
with my
will-
specific questions.
And he will, yes, and that's fine, and Mr. Tuffanelli can do that, Mr. Stopper can do that. If you contact Jack, Mr. Garamendi. Yes, to see if he has any, so we don't have to go through this again. I mean, as for me, I am ready to go shopping. we have discussed it, and I think Mr. Alt said it appropriately. We've been discussing it. We put it off. We discuss it, we put it off, and it's time that we bite the bullet. Yes, we need a DA's office. Yes, we need an animal shelter. So, and we don't have all that information now. I do believe, as Ms. Gomes said, and Mr. Alt, we need a financial package long-term to look at all this. I don't think we have the time for it. I think we need to just make a decision and move on, and that's where I am. If there's no other comments on this, Mr. Chung, did you have anything else you'd like to say? Okay.
No, thank you.
We're finished with this topic. I'd like to move to item 20.
Thank you.
Item 20 is from Human Resources to adopt a resolution authorizing changes to the sheriff's captain job description.
Judy Hawkins, Human Resources and Risk Management. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. What I'm bringing before you today is adjustments to the job description for the position of captain. The changes that we are making are in line with current practices and practices that the office has had for several years. This is changing the ability of sergeants moving to the position of captain to lieutenant. So they do have the experience of the administration, the management administration, before moving to the position of captain.
Ms. Hawkins, would this mean that if there was a sergeant and the sheriff really felt that this person had the capabilities of being a captain, they can just step over being a lieutenant?
Well, right now, the position states sergeant, that they have to have 3 years experience being a sergeant, and we're changing it to the preferred is 1 year lieutenant going to captain.
I mean, we have a sheriff that was a sergeant.
Yes, but that was an appointment. Now, I would also like to point out that we're saying that this is a typical way of becoming a captain.
Okay.
If there are extraordinary circumstances, then the sheriff could look at that. We do have wording in the job description to look at those circumstances.
Okay. Are there any questions or comments on this from the board? Any questions or comments from the public? You got my question. I sent you on special requirements that I didn't understand.
I do apologize.
I know. I probably did it late last night. Okay. On the special requirements, it says possession of an, in this case, advanced, supervisory, and must complete possession of what? Advanced, supervisory, I thought maybe there's something I missed.
That's the post certificate.
So it's possession of a post certificate, but grammatically that didn't make sense to me. They have to have possession of an advanced, supervisory, what? It just, and because the next word is and must.
And that was supposed to be post certificate.
Oh, okay. Oh, so they must have possession of an advanced, supervisory, post certificate, and complete post-management school. That's the only thing I thought, maybe, because advanced and supervisory what?
So they are separate. So they are supposed to have possession of an advanced, and supervisory, and must complete the post-management school within 1 year.
Okay.
So they have to, so what it is saying is they must be in possession of the advanced and supervisory post-certificate and complete the management school within 1 year.
So it says advanced, supervisory,
Those are two separate certificates.
So it would be advanced and. not advanced, comma, because and's crossed out. That's, I mean, Ms.
I know what
Hawkins,
she's
I
saying
don't care.
grammatically.
It doesn't make
Grammatically.
sense.
Advanced, comma, supervisory, strike the comma after supervisory, and it flows grammatically.
So we will take the comma out.
That must complete.
Or we will,
That's okay.
I think, yeah, I think maybe what we could do is say something along the lines of possession of advanced and supervisory post certificates and must complete post management, right? Is that the idea?
yes.
Okay.
Thank you. That's, I mean, okay.
That's
Was that
easy.
the motion?
That's not a substantive change, it's just a little
As amended.
reword.
Right, we're not changing the meaning of the requirement. So yes,
Correct.
we will clean that up.
Right, so may I have a motion as amended, please?
I would-
Comment, please.
I did,
Oh, you did.
I did.
I'll make the motion as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
A second
Garrett
by,
got it. He was
a
supposed to
second
allow
by Mr. Tuffanelli. All in favor? Aye. Passes on a 4-0-1 absent vote. Thank you, Ms.
Thank you.
Hawkins.
Take the comment out.
Outside.
Madam
Item
Clerk.
21 is from the Clerk of the Board of Supervisors to the appointment of applicants to serve on various committees, commissions, advisory boards, and county service areas. So we have a handful of vacancies and applications today. The first is for the Fish and Game Commission, one vacancy for a term expiring 12/31/2021 for a District 1 representative. We have an application from Stephen Salente. For the Parks and Recreation Commission, we have one vacancy for a term expiring 12/31/2021 for a District 5 representative. We have an application from Corey Fisk. For the San Andreas Cemetery District, we have two vacancies for terms expiring 12/31/2023. We have applications from two incumbents, Kenneth Arola and Stephen Arola. For the Solid Waste Task Force, we have one vacancy for a term expiring 12/31/21 for a public member, and we have an application from an incumbent, Janice Osa. And lastly, for the Vallecito Cemetery District, we have one vacancy for a term expiring 12/31/2023, and an application from the incumbent, B. Hollers.
Any modifications, questions, and comments on this? Any public comments on this? Seeing none, may I have a motion?
So moved?
Motion by Supervisor Mills.
No,
Not today.
not today. He isn't me.
That's Stopper.
I'll second it, though.
A second by Supervisor Mills, a motion by Supervisor Stopper. And
It's
you
the
can
only
just
graying
reverse
of this farm, Rita. Come on now.
Guess I just had a senior moment. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Passes on a 4-0-1 absent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move to the last item.
Supervisor announcements. In compliance with AB 1234, chaptered as Government Code Section 53232.3D, board members shall provide brief reports on meetings they attended at the expense of the local agency at the next regular meeting of the legislative body. This report is required to include meetings attended for which there has been expense reimbursement, mileage, meals, lodging, etc., but may also, at the board member's discretion, include any other meeting attended by the supervisor on behalf of the county.
Any comments from the board?
I didn't spend any money.
Oh, okay. Mr. Tuffanelli.
I didn't spend any money either, so.
Mr. Mills.
I didn't spend any money.
I did. I have a LAFCO meeting Monday night, as does Supervisor Tuffanelli. Okay, any comments from staff? Mr. Alt? Council? Madam Clerk? This meeting is adjourned. Oh, Susan, do you have any comments? Not at this time. This meeting is adjourned.